it is. That's okay. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm waiting to see if we're live. Okay, we're live. And I also want to make sure you're okay that we record.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, we appreciate it very much. The cloud. Okay, we're all set. So I'm going to go ahead and start webinar so we can allow people to get in. And while we're letting people do that, we'll just have a little chat.
Okay.
Sandra Postel.
Actually, it's sorry, it's Postel.
Postel. I've been saying that wrong. I've been saying that wrong as long as I've been working with you, and I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. It's funny. Postel. Yeah.
Postel. I love it. Okay. Sandra has been working with our team for a long time, and I was just, Tony was actually asking me how we found each other, and I don't remember if a student emailed you or how that happened, but at any rate, you've been presenting for us for many years.
It is. I was trying to remember that too, actually, Debbie. I think it was, what do you think, 2012, 2013?
I think so. I think from the very beginning. I think you were in our first group.
I think maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah. And, for those of you that are attending, I hope you've gone to the website. I hope you've looked at everything that she has done and accomplished in her life, because it's amazing. I also want to apologize. My granddaughter is here, of course, because it's International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So, of course, my granddaughter's here. So if you hear a little girl in the background, that's what that is. Sandra is very accomplished. She's also very humble. How many books have you authored now?
Well, 4 books on freshwater and then another on the planet. Yeah. So
check those books out. And I just wanted to read a statement really quickly about today and the significance of today. Today is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And the purpose of the day is to achieve full and equal access to and participation in science for women and girls across the world. And I can think of no one better. And this is why we invited her and said, please, can you join us on this particular day? Can you join us and share with us your love of water and your love of science? So with that, I'm going to let you take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. I've just had a wonderful career studying freshwater, and I think it's fantastic that we have this special day to honor women and girls in science, because when we all work together, we can accomplish so much more. And so celebrating women's roles and girls' roles in science, along with boys and men, is super important, because again, this is such a collaborative endeavor. And when we can bring everyone together and work together and give equal opportunity, it magnifies what we can do in the world. So I really appreciate you all joining today. I am going to share my screen with you. And, we'll make this interactive. Let me just bring this up. Desktop. Whoops. Share screen. Share. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, let me bring this up. How about that?
It's a beautiful picture of the moon.
Okay, of the Earth and the moon.
I mean.
So let me get started right here, and keep your questions in mind. We'll have time at the end for questions. I might ask you a question or two as we go through, so hang with me and think about the answers as they come to you, and we'll kind of go through this together. So I think of freshwater, which has been my love professionally, just studying every aspect of it. I think of freshwater as the planet's greatest gift, right? When we go off and explore other planets, Mars, Jupiter, what are we looking for? We're usually looking for water, because water is essential to life. No water, no life. And so that's the thing. And look at this beautiful planet that we live on. This picture was taken in 1968 by the astronauts who were circling the moon. And just came upon this beautiful image of the Earth from space. And it was the first time we got a look of the Earth, at the Earth from outer space. And at the time, it just woke everybody up to how beautiful the Earth is, how blue the Earth is, and just how lucky we are to live on this water-wealthy planet. But less than 1% of all the blue that we're looking at is fresh water, okay? It's fresh and accessible, much less than 1%. Most of this is ocean water, right? The rivers, the lakes are a very small share. And the other thing that this picture showed us is that Earth is finite. The amount of water is finite. We're used to the rain coming down, the snow coming down, but it's all finite, right? And yet, if you think about us, we humans, we've grown in number, we have demands, we buy all these things. So our demand for water has not been finite. And so everything that we look around the room that you're in right now, everything that's in that room takes water to make. Look at your clothes. I bet a lot of us right now have on a cotton shirt. Take a guess about how much water it might take to make one cotton shirt. Take a guess. I'm going to show you the answer in just a second. So think about it. Here we go. 700 gallons can vary a little bit up or down, but it can take a lot of water to make one shirt. That's about as much water as most of us use at home in a week, okay? It's a lot of water in one shirt, right? And why is that? Why do you think it takes so much water to make a cotton shirt? Does it have to do with the factory? What do you think? Here's the reason. It takes a lot of water to grow just about everything. Plants need water. They take the sun and they need water, and they use that to photosynthesize, and they grow. And we'll see as we go out this presentation this morning, go through it, that agriculture is so important to us, right? We all need to eat. We all need to use things that come from farms, but it takes a lot of water. So keep that in mind. It takes a little bit of water too at the factory, but a lot of it is used in the field, okay, to grow that cotton. Now, multiply all of that. Let's take one more example. I happen to like pizza quite a bit. Look at what's on this pizza: cheese, tomatoes, basil. All of that takes water, right? To grow out in the field, you have to make the crust and the dough. About 330 gallons. So one lesson I've taken from this is an easy way to not use so much water is to not waste things, right? That doesn't change my quality of life at all. If I'm not going to eat 3 slices of pizza, why should I take 3 slices? Because if I throw it away, I'm throwing away 40 gallons of water, right? So it's a really easy way to think about water in our everyday life, is to realize how much it takes to make everything. Now we multiply all that by all the other people on the planet with us, right? You and me and all of us today here joining in this session. Multiply that by nearly 7 billion people on the planet now. And we can begin to understand all the things that we use. And again, this is not to make us feel guilty. It's to make us aware, right, of how much water it takes to keep ourselves going. So here's a map that some other scientists and I produced a few years ago. The lead scientist was Kate Brauman from the University of Minnesota at the time. And it looks at just how we're depleting water, watershed by watershed by watershed all over the world. So look at everything that's in red, okay? You have much of the Western United States. You have over here North Africa, of course. You have India, Pakistan. This is the Indus River right here. You have a good bit of Asia. Here's northern China. Here's southeastern Australia. And these places are where a lot of our food is grown, right? This is where we have a lot of irrigation going on, a lot of use of water to grow food, and a lot of it's in red, which means that it's being depleted in one way or the other. Here's the Rio Grande in the west. Here's the Murray River, very important river in Australia. Here's the end of the Colorado River. We're going to come back to this a little bit later. It's dry because we're taking so much out upstream, okay? We've built a lot of dams around the world in order to store water, to supply it when we need it, where we need it. We have hydropower coming from dams, right? We have water supply, recreation, irrigation water for farmers, controlling floods by capturing flood water. But these dams have also, as you can see here, blocked the flow of rivers. This is the Colorado River. This is the biggest first super dam ever built in the world. This is Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. Some of you may have seen it. It's not far from the Grand Canyon. And it blocks the flow of the river, creates a lot of benefits. But imagine you're a fish trying to get up the river to your habitat so you can spawn and create more fish. You're going to be blocked big time, right, by this dam. We're also having a problem with groundwater depletion, right? This is very much an out of sight, out of mind problem. If any of you have flown across the country, you look down and see these big circles across much of the Midwest and the High Plains, the Great Plains. These are circular irrigation systems called center pivot, and they pull water up from deep in the earth. And we're seeing more and more depletion of groundwater because we're not really managing it in the right way, right? Nature isn't replenishing it as fast as we're pulling it out. And again, this is affecting how we grow our food, okay? We've lost a lot of wetlands from our use of water, and this is really critical habitat for birds and fish and wildlife. Some of you might live in the Midwest. You might remember, hopefully none of you experienced this, but back a few years ago, I think it was 2014, the city of Toledo, Ohio, which you can see right here, which is situated very close to Lake Erie, the western end of it, had to shut off its water supply for a few days and tell everyone, don't use the water. Why? Because a toxic algal bloom had formed in the western part of the lake. This is from pollutants, mostly nitrogen and phosphorus from farms, running off the land and into the water, and then causing a growth of algae that can become toxic. It doesn't always, but it can. And so Toledo's water supply was right around here, and they had to shut off the water supply because it was dangerous to drink. And so it shows us the importance of the quality of water. How we manage the land influences the quality of the water, which influences the safety of our drinking water, right? So as a result of all these things, we have a lot of risk to fish and frogs and everything that depends on fresh water. This number kind of blew me away when I saw it, that since 1970, so that's about 50 years ago, the abundance of freshwater vertebrates, this is fish and frogs and so on, those populations have declined 83%. That's a hard number to get your head around. If I can phrase that a different way, for every 100 frogs and fish that existed 50 years ago, there are now only 17 of them. So that's a lot of loss of life in a very short period of time, right? Which says to us, wow, we're not doing so great managing these rivers and lakes and freshwater ecosystems, the wetlands, the floodplains, right? Now, not to make things too much worse, but we know it's hard with climate change. Everything we've just been talking about is getting more challenging, right? Because of climate change. We experience a lot of the impacts of climate change through the water cycle, where it rains, how much it rains, how much water evaporates, which is increasing as temperatures get higher. The big driver here is temperature. As the atmosphere warms, it expands, which means it can hold more water. And that's why we're seeing more drought, more floods, changes in river flows. Because of higher temperature, glaciers are starting to melt. Water quality is getting more challenging again because water temperatures are going up. We're having more dead zones, as you all know from last year, especially a lot more fire in our watersheds, and then rising sea level. So this is a tough nut, but I want to tell you right off the bat, we can do things about this. We have to deal with the climate change crisis, absolutely. If we don't deal with that, a lot of the water solutions I'm going to talk about won't really cut it. But if we begin to deal with the climate crisis, there are a lot of things we can do to repair the water cycle, okay? So it's a challenging time, but I want to give you a sense that there's realistic optimism here. We can make a difference, and we can make our water security happen for future generations as well as ours, okay? But the first thing is to realize that we can't do what we did in the past and expect a different outcome in the future, right? If we're going to change this story, we have to manage water differently. And I love a quote by one of our famous scientists, Albert Einstein, who said, "We cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." If we're going to have healthier rivers, wetlands, floodplains, groundwater, we can't keep doing what we've been doing because the problems are just going to get worse, right? We have to think differently. And I think the two big themes, the two big changes in mindset and approach to water are right here. Instead of always looking for more water, remember it's finite, we have to learn to conserve, to use water more efficiently, get more value out of every drop that we take from nature, and do more with less. And that takes science, technology, innovation, working together, and being more conscious, right, of our use and management of water. So conservation is key. And then secondly, instead of trying to control nature all the time, building big dams, building big levees to control the floods, more and more control over where we're bringing water, how about if we try working with nature as a partner rather than trying to control it all the time, right? There's going to be some of both that are necessary, but by and large, we haven't been looking at nature as a partner. We've been looking at it as something to control. And what we're seeing is nature has a lot to give us if we learn from it, pay attention to it, and work with it. Okay, and there's a lot of great science going on in engineering, in ecology, and bringing these issues together. So it's a really, really exciting time when it comes to water. So let's just talk for a minute about conservation. We're going to need this in all of our uses of water, on our farms, in our factories where we make all the products that we use and buy, and at home. Okay, and I want to just touch on this a little bit. I mentioned agriculture as the biggest user of water. It just takes a lot of water, to grow potatoes and beans, and to grow the meat that we eat. Here's the chickens and the beef and the grains, okay? About 70% of the water that we take out of rivers and lakes and groundwater, about 70% of it goes to agriculture. It's the biggest user of water in a global sense, okay? And because crops need to be grown where it's sunny, there's often not as much water. And that's kind of, nature's given us a challenge there, right? Crops need both water and sun. So a lot of the reason we've moved water from rainy places to drier places is because that's where the sun is, right? So it's challenging to do this. I want to tell you a story about one river in the United States called the Verde River, and the partnership that came about between conservationists, scientists, businesses, and farmers, irrigators, to make this river healthier, even in a very dry place where a lot of that water was taken for farms, okay, for irrigation. The Verde River is in Arizona. It's part of the Colorado River Basin. And when I was serving as the freshwater fellow at National Geographic, we worked with a lot of other people, the Nature Conservancy in Arizona being an important partner, to showcase how conservation can make a difference without damaging the economy and without causing harm to the irrigators themselves. It just took some innovation, okay, and some working together. So this is a woman named Kim Schoenig. She's a hydrologist, and she came into the Verde Valley from Oregon, working for the Nature Conservancy. And the Verde Valley is a beautiful place for migratory birds, fish. The habitat alongside the river, you can see it here, is perfect for the migratory birds in the southwestern United States that don't really have other places to go. There's not a lot of water in the Southwest. So these rivers are extremely important. And what had happened was that the irrigators were taking most of this water out of the river in order to water their farms, right, and their land. And so for miles and miles, this river would dry up every summer, 5, 6, 7, 8 miles, no water at all, or very, very little water. So Kim Schoenig started talking to the irrigators and saying, let's look at how this irrigation system works. All of the ditches that are in the valley to deliver irrigation water were taking really more water out, as it turned out, than the irrigators, the farmers, really needed. And so Kim talked with this irrigator, Frank Gamendin, who was called the ditch boss. He kind of managed how the ditches worked at the time. And basically, with building of a lot of trust between the conservation community and the irrigators, they worked to install this very simple but very meaningful device called an automated head gate. It's managed by solar. I think you can see it a little bit up here, but it allows Frank, the ditch boss, to take just as much water as his irrigators need and leave the rest for the river. Without this head gate right here, all the water that you see here would be flowing down the ditch system and nothing would be left for the river, right? And so this made a huge difference. All of a sudden, the irrigators were getting the water they needed and the river was no longer going dry. That spawned some other ideas. Here's a young farmer, Zach Hauser, and his farm was the last in line on the ditch, right? He was still getting enough water, but he realized if he stopped flooding his field and installed more efficient water conserving drip irrigation, which delivers water. You've seen these little, these little soaker hoses and little drip systems. I'm sure you've all seen them even in gardens. They can be used. They deliver water directly to the plant, directly to the roots. And so you're eliminating a lot of extra water use, a lot of loss of water to evaporation. So he put in drip irrigation with some help. And so the nice thing here is you get this triple win, right? The farmers got a new irrigation system. The habitat for birds and wildlife improved. This is a great blue heron enjoying beautiful habitat. And more recreation in the economy. It was great for fishing, great for boating. People could come up from Phoenix, big city south of here, and enjoy the river for fishing and boating and recreation, bird watching. So it was great for the irrigators, great for the local economy, and great for the environment. And all that happened was we got smarter in this river valley about how to manage the water. Everybody got what they needed. So the value of water was so much higher at the end, just by getting smarter, collaborating, and leaving enough for the river. So it's a great story. And I have to say, the innovations in this river valley continue, okay? It hasn't stopped. There's a lot more really interesting things going on. So most of us live in cities and towns. What can we do in cities and towns to help repair the water cycle? It turns out there's a lot we can do. About 30 years ago, the United States legislature, Congress, passed a law that said all manufacturers of faucets and shower heads and toilets, the main fixtures that use water in our homes, had to become more efficient, had to meet certain standards of efficiency, okay? Most of us who were alive at the time, I was, didn't see any difference, right? It was just that there was less water coming out of this tap. If you're brushing your teeth, right, the amount of water that you're using as you brush your teeth depends on, one, whether you turn the tap off when you're brushing your teeth or leave it running the whole time. But it also depends on how much water is actually coming out, right, when you turn on the tap. And that's a function of the technology, right? And so because of this, and because the government began to help people understand by labeling products which are more efficient, that everybody started to have more efficient fixtures in their homes and in their offices and in schools, right? And so water use came down. Our population was going up, but our water use per person was going down, okay? And that made a huge difference. We have saved at this point, think about this number, 9 billion with a B, 9 billion gallons of water a day, 9 billion gallons of water a day because of better technology in our homes and offices and schools. And every time we build a new home, it's getting this more water efficient technology. So that's 9 billion gallons of water that can remain in a river or can remain, in a lake that otherwise would have to be drawn out of it. And this makes a big difference. I used to live in Massachusetts. I live in New Mexico now. But back in the mid 1980s, Boston, and this is what happens in a lot of cities, right? Look at this water use, up since 1950, 60, 70. Wow. And here we are in the mid 1980s. Water use had grown so much that it was above what the engineers called the safe level. So what do we typically do if you're an engineer at a utility, a water utility, right? You say, oh my goodness, we need to expand the supply. We need to go out and find more water, right? That's the typical approach that we've used. Well, some people said, hey, wait a minute. If we go out and find more water, we're going to be taking it from a river and it's going to impact the fish there. How about we look at conservation as an alternative? This was pretty new back then, okay? And so that's exactly what the Massachusetts water people did. They took the public's interest to heart and they said, okay, let's look at what we can do with conservation. And they looked at all kinds of things, industries, homes, pricing water more effectively, educating people about water, and water use began to come down. So today, I'm not sure you can see this number, but it's more than 40% lower today than it was at the peak here. That's a huge story. And the nice thing is the river that would have been tapped to increase the supply had the conservation approach not been taken is the Connecticut River. I was just canoeing this river a couple years ago and took this picture because it's a beautiful river. Actually kayaking, I was kayaking the river. And this is the river that would have been tapped. It's a healthier river today because it didn't have to supply Boston 70 miles away with more water because conservation worked and it was better for the environment and it was better for the economy, right? Because you have a healthier river, and it was better for the people in Boston because it was cheaper to save water than to take more out of the river and pipe it over to Boston. So again, a win-win situation. Let's look at another thing here about where we live in cities and towns and think about this, okay? When it rains, let's just take a look at, can you see let's just take a look at this little piece of street, okay? What happens when it rains on that street typically? What would happen? It would run off and maybe cause a flood, right? If you're having a really intense rainstorm. We saw a lot of pictures of this in the last couple of years when it rains, and the water's flooding, cars can't get through the street. It's picking up a lot of pollution and delivering that to the local creek. It's a mess, right? Because of why? Because it's not infiltrating. It's not infiltrating into the earth. before the cities and towns, before the school parking lot, before our shopping centers, before our driveways and sidewalks, all these things that prevent water from infiltrating, rain from infiltrating. Before that, what was there? Wetlands, soil, grasses, things that allowed the water to infiltrate. So there's a really exciting new thing happening in cities and towns now called green infrastructure, where we try to mimic what nature would do before we had our cities and towns there. We're trying to repair that urban water cycle and let water do what it would have done before we were there, right? And it's a really exciting time. So what we're seeing is cities and towns, you can see great examples of this if you live in Philadelphia, Seattle, Portland, Baltimore, all over the country, Illinois too. There's some great examples. Kansas, where cities and towns are adopting green infrastructure approaches to managing their stormwater. And it's a great way to repair the water cycle. So this is something called a rain garden, where you have beautiful flowers and plants, and you can't see it so well here, but it's a little bit of a depression. So water that's coming down as rain, that's running off the sidewalk, is captured in this rain garden, and it infiltrates the soil. It replenishes the groundwater, right? And it creates a nice little place to walk by with flowers and plants. It's beautiful. Same thing here. This is something we call a swale, a vegetated swale or a bioswale. And it's again, a little depression. You can see it right here that captures rainwater going off the sidewalk, coming off the street, and it helps to infiltrate the soil and the groundwater below. Really great examples. And again, it's beautiful, it's pretty, right? And so it saves water from running off, and it turns all of that flood water that would be a huge nuisance and pick up all that pollution, turns it into an asset, right? Turns it into a benefit. We're also seeing, this is a little more expensive, but the idea of permeable pavement. What if this sidewalk was permeable instead of impermeable? What if it could allow some rain to infiltrate by the way the materials are made and the way it can absorb water? So all these things can make a big difference, right? In our local water cycle. The other thing we're seeing, and I find this really exciting also, is, I mentioned we have a lot of dams all over, and they've served very useful purposes, and they still do. There's no way we're going to be taking all our dams down. They serve a lot of useful purposes. But some dams are obsolete. We don't need them anymore. Maybe we don't need the electricity like we used to. Maybe they're old textile dams from the 19th century. There's a lot of those in New England and Pennsylvania. And they're really not being used anymore, but they're still there, blocking the river. So they're starting to come down. We're taking them down. And they're a safety hazard too. You can imagine if a dam breaks, as we saw in Michigan last spring, they can cause a big flood and a big danger, a risk to the population, the people living downstream. So we're starting to dismantle those dams that are either not serving a good purpose or are a safety risk to the communities downstream. And we've already taken down 1,200 dams over the last 20 years. And most of them are small, relatively small dams. They're not like the big Hoover Dam that we saw earlier, but some of them are a bit bigger. Here's one that's a pretty good size on a river called the Elwha in Washington State. And the reason I want to show you this is just how quickly nature heals itself when we give it a chance, okay? So look at the next slide here. So this is the dam, it's starting to come down. This is the reservoir that was behind that dam, okay? All of this area right here was all of the reservoir, okay? The dam was probably down here somewhere. Take the dam down. Now, the river is starting to flow again. It's starting to build a beautiful channel through the reservoir like it used to, right? And the really amazing thing as it begins to come back is that the life in the river came back too. These are Chinook salmon, really important species of salmon in the Western United States especially. And within just a few months of the removal of the dam, scientists there counted more than 4,000 spawning, meaning they're having young, right? Chinook salmon above that former dam site. So it's a great lesson, a great inspiring story to me, to those of us concerned about restoring life on the planet, that if you take the dam down, give the river a chance to become more natural again, life comes back, the fish came back. And this is a really, really great thing to keep in mind. Let me tell you one more story, and then I want to go to your questions and have a little more discussion. One thing that I had always wondered about as a freshwater conservationist was this major river in the American Southwest, the Colorado River, no longer reaching the sea. If you think about a river, imagine the idea that a river has a destiny, right? The idea is that it brings fresh water and nutrients and sediment from the watershed all the way down to the sea. That's really a part of a river's function, right? Is to connect with the ocean, connect with the sea. And the fisheries in the sea depend on a river bringing those nutrients and sediment down to it, right? Well, this is what the delta, the very end of the Colorado River, looked like for most of the time since the building of the last big dam on the Colorado. I showed you the Hoover Dam. There are probably a dozen more dams that block the flow of the Colorado at different places in order to supply irrigation, to supply cities like Tucson and Phoenix and Las Vegas and Los Angeles. They all get water from the Colorado River, but nothing was left for the river itself. It was all taken. Nothing was there. And part of the problem was that we thought there was more water in the river when we divvied up the water among the 7 states and Mexico than it really carries. It happened to be a really rainy time back in the 1920s when the states divvied up the water among themselves. So they gave away more than was really there, and there was really nothing left at all for the river. And nobody said, hey, the river needs some too. Let's not forget the river. We weren't thinking that way at the time, right? So here's what the delta looks like. We took this shot. I was there with a team from National Geographic. This was taken in 2014, I believe it was, right? 2012 or 2014. And it's a shocking thing. I had seen this delta for the first time in the mid-90s. And at that time, we kind of wrote it off as dead. There's nothing we can do. This is just the way it is. But the fact of the matter is that when you add water, life can come back, right? And so in 2014, and this is the right year, in 2014, the US and Mexico decided to do something really unique. They decided to operate the last dam on the Colorado River. It's right at the border of the US and Mexico, to operate the dam in a way that gives the delta some water. Let's give some water back to nature and see what happens. This was hard to do because there were a lot of demands on that water upstream. But conservationists had worked really hard on this, and scientists had worked really hard on this for about 15 years to get the 2 countries to agree to do this. So in the spring, in March of 2014, these gates went up. And as you can see, the water began to come out. Normally, there'd be very little or no water flowing into the delta, right? All the water would be diverted for the farmers to use. So the gates came up, and within days, we could actually canoe on the upper part of that delta, okay? This is me. This is a very well-respected bird scientist, ornithologist, and ecologist, wetlands ecologist, who knows the Colorado Delta really, really well, has studied it for a very long time. We went off canoeing. I think he was able to hear or see something like 300, anyway, a lot of different bird species coming back right away as the river began to flow. We went out every morning to find where the river might be that morning. You can see it's coming from way up here, gradually reclaiming a channel in the very dry delta. This is me taking notes. These are some of the scientists and conservationists. There were huge numbers of them out studying what was going on in different places on the delta. And then after about 8 weeks, this is a shot taken from the air, the river did reach the sea. Just a little bit of it reached the sea, okay? This normally would not have happened. This was a scientific experiment to see what would happen if you lifted those gates of the dam, let the river through, watch it reclaim its channel, would it reach the sea? And again, in a normal spring before all the dams, there'd be a huge amount of water coming down, you know, from the watershed and reaching the sea, a huge amount. This was a tiny, tiny bit, but it showed that if we decided to give the river some water back and restore a bit of the delta, that we could do it. And scientists are now planting trees in different parts of the delta. They're delivering some irrigation water to trees in the delta to try to give some bits of habitat back to the delta. And it will never be what it once was, but to give fish, wildlife, and birds, migratory birds especially, some habitat, right? So to me, it shows that by conserving, this is really our take-home message from my talk this morning, okay? By conserving and working with nature and using the best of our science and ingenuity, we can build a better water future for all life, human and non-human life. And that's a really, really great lesson, right? It's a really great goal. We can do this if we put our minds to it. The best of our science and technology and ingenuity can help us do this. So that's what I'm going to leave you with from my talk this morning. I hope you have some questions. I would love, what time is it? We've got plenty of time for some of your questions.
Yes, we do. And there's some questions from YouTube. And so while we're doing that, folks that are in the webinar, don't be shy. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get those in. So one of the questions from YouTube is, well, it's wow, the map of the water use is so surprising. So I think they're talking about the one maybe from the very beginning. And is there a way to replenish the groundwater? Is stormwater management part of the issue?
Is there a way to manage I think I lost let me just figure out, what am I doing here?
Oh.
New share. I'm trying to stop sharing.
So at the top, there should be something that says stop screen share. Or it's either the top or the bottom. It's a red icon.
Okay, stop screen share. Sorry.
No, it's okay. You've got a so it'll be in part of webinar the webinar service. So it won't be on yours.
Right.
It'll be a bar. I wonder if I can do it. Let me see if I can do it.
I should be able to do this. Let's see. Can you see me? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see you and we see your slide deck.
Oh, there's a stop share. Okay, there we are.
There. Okay.
Okay, good. Okay, sorry about that.
No, you're great. I'll turn my camera on too.
Okay.
So the question was, and I think they were talking about, because it was an early question. So I think they were talking about the map that was made. It was super interesting, by the way, with watershed, like the map of the worldwide watershed use. And so the question is, wow, that map is, really surprising. Is there a way to replenish the groundwater, and is stormwater management one of the issues?
Yes, the answer is yes. And again, if we had more time, I would show you another story about replenishing groundwater. But there are a number of ways we can do it. One, of course, is to pump less, right? To make sure that we're not taking more groundwater out than nature is putting in. Where that's difficult to do, and this is being tried in California. We get a lot of our fruits and vegetables from the Central Valley of California, and that's very much dependent on groundwater. And so one of the things they're trying there is to take flood water that occurs in the wintertime and directing it to the valley and allowing it to recharge. So using flood water that's sort of in excess of what the natural environment needs, and direct it to farms and allow it to replenish the groundwater. And they've had some very good success with this. You know, it's not going to solve the problem, but it's bringing, you know, it's bringing the water tables up a bit. And so that's definitely part of the solution. And then later on, I talked about this green infrastructure. So where we've depleted groundwater in our cities, we can start to put some water back in using that, you know, green infrastructure and replenishing the ground. And wetlands, restoring wetlands. They're going to absorb water like a sponge, right? And replenish the groundwater. So a big yes to your answer that we can do this. Yeah.
And that's a perfect segue into the question that's coming from a participant in the webinar. And that is, what can we do at home? For example, how do we create this green infrastructure at home?
Well, our homes are, it depends where we live, right? If we're in an apartment, you know, we can just use water more efficiently within our homes. If we're in a home with a backyard, we can plant things that are more native to the climate we live in. And this is particularly important if you live in the West where there's not a lot of rain. You don't want to have, you know, a beautiful green lawn that takes a lot of water to keep it green if you're living in a very dry place. And so we have something called Xeriscape, which is, you know, Xera is Greek for dry. So sort of very water conscious landscaping. And even in the East and Midwest, we plant a lot of lawn that requires water in excess of what rain delivers. So just again, thinking, what would nature have here? What would nature want here? Because that's also good for birds and bees. And so if we again think about nature and try to mimic what nature would do in our own yard, we can have a nice positive effect. Okay, it'll conserve water, it'll create habitat for the life that wants to be there, and make us feel like we're part of this restoration of the natural world.
I love that. I've heard the phrase when you're thinking about stormwater, because in my community, I volunteer and work on sustainability issues, and stormwater is sort of my passion.
Oh, that's great.
And one of the things we try to tell people is, you know, think about it, where the water falls, how can you keep it there? What can you do to actually keep it in that one location? Mm-hmm. So another question from YouTube, do we know the impact of moving water around from one, I think they're saying from one water cycle to another. So like in agriculture, if we're purchasing a product from strawberries from Ecuador and we're buying them here in the United States, the water trapped in there, is there an impact? Do we know if there's an impact of moving water in that way? I think
yeah, so that's a really great question. You know, and again, there's many aspects to this water footprint of ours, but if you think about it, you know, I had coffee this morning. Well, what if that coffee came from Ethiopia, right? That means that my personal water footprint is landing in Ethiopia, or maybe it came from Guatemala, right? And that footprint lands in Guatemala. So again, we exchange, and this is part of a global economy. Of course, we get products from all over the world. But lesson I often take from it is, again, be mindful of what we use, where it's coming from. And then again, we can do so much by not wasting, right? It's so easy. I have half a cup of coffee right here, right? If I just throw that down the drain, I'm effectively wasting, it's about 34 gallons of water to make a cup of coffee. Again, mainly because it takes water to grow the beans, right? And so if I just decide, oh, if I took more than I really needed, throw it down the drain, that's about 17 gallons of water, right? That I'm just throwing away. So again, it's hard to talk about this without making us feel guilty. I don't want to make you feel guilty. I just want to say that we have some agency here. We have some ability to make a difference in our own life that's not going to affect our happiness, right? I'm not going to feel less bad, right? If I only take the coffee I'm actually going to drink. And so it's just that sort of raising awareness. And if we do that with ourselves, with our family, with our friends, with our community, well, then we can make a difference.
I think it's with so many other things. You don't know. We don't know what we don't know, and we don't have to be guilty about not knowing that. But once we know, are we doing better? Are we taking that information and doing better? Yeah.
Exactly.
So another question, it goes to I'm going to say this wrong, the Elwha River picture.
Right.
And I think they're talking about the one, not the dam, but the one where it was removed. And they're wondering if that was all sediment. If
yes.
What you saw on the, okay. Yeah.
Yes. So that was, so what a dam does, if you think about this, okay, the river is carrying sediment and nutrients along with the flow of fresh water. And then if you put a dam there, it's not only going to block the fish that are trying to, navigate the river, it's also going to block the sediment. So you're going to have an accumulation of sediment behind the dam. And this is in large part what limits the life of a dam, right? You can only have so much sediment build up before you can stop storing enough water, right? And so that big reservoir that you saw was sediment that had been trapped behind the dam. And that was now going to, be basically the beginnings of a healthier river. And that sediment would gradually start to move downstream again as the water carried it. And that's one of the things you have to be careful about when you take a dam down, that you're not suddenly going to have a rush of sediment come down with the floodwater. So that's something the engineers have to examine, study, look at. Scientists have to be careful about that. But on the whole, it's a good thing for the food web to get that sediment, the nutrients, the water flowing, again. Yeah.
That was going to be my follow-up question. I imagine there's a big difference between removing like the sediment that's backed up in an urban setting, because I'm on the Fox River, and we have several dams that we're going to be removing. And I know one of the things that we talk about is, well, what's in that sediment?
Yeah.
Are there pollutants? So
That's right. You do have to be mindful of what's in it, how rapidly it's going to move. If there are toxic chemicals in it, you want to be super careful about where those are going to land and what's going to happen to them. So absolutely, you have to be very, very cautious, careful, and scientific about this kind of a process. Yeah.
Well, speaking of scientific, you showed a really cool picture of you doing field work. And I was wondering, as a scientist, how are you, I think people think that to do science, you have to be in the field all the time. And I was just wondering about how much of your time do you think you spend planning and conducting investigations? How often are you in the field? What percentage of time?
Well, it's interesting because science happens in many ways, right? I'm not what I would call a lab scientist or even a field scientist. I'm more of an integrator of science with an eye toward how we can affect better policy in how we manage water, right? So I'm sort of in that intermediate category. I sort of describe my work as bridging science and policy and practice, right? So I consider that to be integrating a lot of different science. I mean, fresh water is a very interdisciplinary field. You have to understand ecology, economics, anthropology, society. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. And yet coming up with a good decision about how to manage water requires that you understand a little bit of all that. So you've got to learn how to integrate what the engineers know, what the botanists know and the biologists know, and what the ecologists know about what the wetlands are doing. And then how do you make a policy out of that for society to manage water better? So that's kind of the space that I work in. And I just find it fascinating. I studied in college, I studied geology and political science. And people used to laugh at me, what are you going to do? Throw rocks at politicians? Or what is this? I said, no, but I just thought you have to understand both the science and the policy to make good decisions. And then in grad school, I studied, hydrology and wetlands and sort of the aspects of environmental management that go into this. So it was I didn't really plan it that way, but it was a perfect way to prepare for a career in fresh water because it is so interdisciplinary. And I just find it a ton of fun to be dealing with experts and learning what I need to learn from each of the experts to come up with these kinds of ideas. It's really fascinating.
I don't know that I've ever shared this with you as many times as we've talked, but I'm actually a trained limnologist myself. So freshwater is also my passion.
Oh, I didn't
and,
know that. That's fantastic.
For someone who might be considering wanting to do what you do, because it's so interesting. One of the things about you that I want to note is that you're very humble. You're able to bring technical information for everyone to understand. And even when I'm reading your books, you are very open to all ideas. And I think that is critically important in the work that you do. And so that's more of a statement, but do you know what I'm saying? Do you have any ideas about that? Like, I think it's important that you're able to listen. And I think you're really good at that. Do you have any thoughts on that? It's more of a statement.
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that because I consider that a compliment. I think the more, and I have to say, I think as a young scientist or a young researcher, I probably had, more ego involved than I do now. I think as you spend more time working on these issues, you're also aware of how much you don't know. You think you know it all, but oh my gosh, you don't know that. You just don't. And so the more you learn, the more you're aware of what you don't know. And so I think we have to approach all of science with some humility. Look at the moment we're in right now. It's a very humbling moment that the best of our science in ecology, in health, in medicine, couldn't really save us from this moment that we're all going through together. It's a humbling moment. And I think anytime we approach nature, we need to approach it with humility. We're one species among very many more that we're only just beginning to learn a bit about. And they're fascinating. There are just fascinating elements of the natural world, from the microorganisms to all aspects of the food web that help sustain us. We're part of it. We're not higher than it. We're not lower than it. We're just part of it. And to appreciate everything that supports the life on this planet, including us, is, I think, where it all has to start. So I appreciate you asking that, Debbie.
You're welcome. I'm going to ask one more. It's 11 o'clock exactly, so I hope this is okay. Since you're a limnologist, right? How often? Oh, I'm sorry. Since you're a freshwater person, how often do you use in your work cause and effect thinking and stability and change thinking? How often do you use those things in your work? Those two skills in your work?
Yeah, I would say all the time. Because you're looking to understand what's happening. If you have a consequence that you're trying to understand, you've got to start looking at what the causes are and how they relate. And those, again, in freshwater world, will be very interdisciplinary causes. There are, things happening on the ground that are caused by a policy or an incentive that, a city person will have, or that a farmer will have. We're all making decisions, right, based on the information we have and the incentives we have. So cause and effect is really important. And then we're looking for resilience and a healthy environment in which to live, which gets to all of these other issues of stability. And so I would say those are concepts that we're using all the time, to better analyze what's happening in the world.
Perfect. So I want you to know that we educators are working on getting more kids to have those skills, so we can create a pipeline of thinkers is our
That's
goal.
Great. Exactly what we need.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we appreciate you so much. Oh my gosh, I did all this talking and there's no questions in here. Oh, quickly, documentary recommendations. Can you recommend summer school programs or camps that you might know about? And just a very, thank you so much. You're very enlightening.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. Gosh, I do not know about camps to recommend. That's an interesting question. It seems to require a good Google search for starters. I do not know. I'm sorry about that. Documentaries. There are a lot of good documentaries. Where would you start on those? There was one that came out of Bullfrog Films recently that was looking at Las Vegas and how it had used water and conserved water. And I found that to be, I was asked to review it and, write a little, endorsement of it or something. And I really enjoyed watching that. So that's one that comes to mind. And there are many more, but again, I think there are some great documentaries out there that can help, give some graphics and some stories to a lot of the issues we've been talking about today. So I think that's a great idea.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You're the best.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for joining.